Welcome to the Alien Invasion number 254, recorded on Thursday, January 10th, 2019. I'm Anessa, along with my co-host Brad, and special guest, Dan Myrick. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks. Glad to be here, guys.
On this episode, we'll be talking about aliens as per the norm, but we'll also be talking to Dan about his new docu-drama, Skyman. Before all of that, though, our question. If you were abducted by a fictional alien race, what race would you hope that you were abducted by?
A smarter one.
We could only hope.
Yes. One definitely more intelligent than our current race.
Yeah. I'm inclined to agree.
Yeah. I have a lot to learn.
I think we all do. It would be very humbling to meet a race that would be able to come to our planet for sure. Gosh, yeah. But
even the low races on the totem pole are smart enough to make it across the universe. So
yeah,
one would assume that if you can traverse interstellar space, you're going to be a little bit smarter than us here on the home planet.
Hopefully they weren't a race of intergalactic car thieves, and they just grabbed the ship.
Yeah, they might be some ruffians, some spacefaring ruffians. You never know, but that might be kind of fun, actually.
Yeah,
I'm sure we could learn plenty from them too.
Right,
you're smart enough to steal a spaceship. You got a little on the ball there.
Yeah, like a group of Han Solos, right?
Oh man, but fictional alien race. I think it would be kind of cool. I'm gonna go Star Trek, and I'm going to say it would be kind of cool to meet the Vulcans.
Yeah, for me, I think it would be Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh yes.
Going, taking a trip up in the mothership. That would be my dream.
Going the Dreyfus route. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't know if I could leave the family behind, but
a quick trip,
quick little vacation wouldn't be bad.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think your answer is better than mine. I changed my answer to dance. All right.
No, I tell you, I mean, that ending is one of my all-time favorite endings, right? Where they initially let out pretty much everyone that has disappeared.
Yep.
Over the years. And, I grew up in the 70s and 80s where, all these events over the Devil's Triangle, Bermuda Triangle, and all, and they're all coming out. And they haven't aged, right? And that famous line where Einstein was right, and then he says, well, Einstein was probably one of them, right? And it's such a great moment. And so I use a little bit of that sort of like time dilation in my own film, where, how cool would it be to be taken up by an intelligent species like that? And for you, it may only be a week hanging out and chilling out, but you come back to Earth and, 50 years has gone by. So, but I just thought that was a really cool way of kind of marrying a narrative story with Richard Dreyfuss in with kind of, Eisensteinian physics, which I just thought was brilliant. And that's Spielberg at his best, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That and Jaws. Jaws just scared the crap.
Jaws, yeah.
I love that movie so much.
Such a great movie.
So, do you want to get into? You want me to do the first news story?
It's got you written all over it.
Excellent. So, this time out, I chose a story from actually USA Today. Just came out today, actually. Alien life possible on nearby super Earth, scientists have announced. Now, this nearby super Earth is still, 1.2 gosh, 1.5 light years away, I believe. And it's Barnard's star. We've talked about that in the past. And Barnard B is within the Goldilocks zone, but it's still 274 degrees below zero.
That's the Goldilocks zone.
I think it's on the farther edge of the Goldilocks zone.
Right.
But it's they're saying it's somewhat akin to Europa. The only difference is like Jupiter's moon Europa gets some of the tidal heating, from Jupiter and from its position in the solar system in general. And so deep beneath the ice, it has a warm core, so there's liquid water. Now, the concern here is that, and there's a number of ifs, if it has tidal forces working for it, it could potentially have that sort of same possibilities here. No, I'm sorry. It's, let's see, 30 trillion miles from Earth. That's where Barnard's star is. And let's see. Because the light from Barnard's star provides it with only 2% of the energy the Earth receives from the sun. Whew. Well, that would explain the frigid temperatures. Holy cow. Yeah, this is really interesting. And these researchers just presented this today at an annual meeting of the American Astronomical Society in Seattle. So they've been really keeping a close eye on the Barnard system. So it'll be interesting to see what else comes about, especially when the Webb, it's the Webb satellite, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Deep space, yeah. And we're going to have a couple other telescopes, the one in Chile.
Yeah, that's coming online.
Yeah.
And gosh, I think the other one that's in the, I can't remember if it's the Antarctic or the Arctic, where they've got it kind of drilled in the ice, and they're using that as a part of, and they're not necessarily using the ice as the focal point, but it's located there because of its unique properties of where it's at. Gosh, I wish I'd had time to dig up the details on that one. So we've got a lot of things coming down the pipe here so that we can investigate some of these other potentially alien life hotspots, as it were.
Well, yeah, I mean, you talk about these exoplanets, which, certainly over the last, I'd say, 8 to 10 years, it seems like not a few months go by where another one is discovered, right? With our ability to reach deeper into space and with the resolving power of our newer telescopes, we're starting to discover that, at least statistically, there are lots of planets in these Goldilocks zones that just increase the odds, right, of potential life elsewhere. And I mean, if you were just to extrapolate what we've seen in our own backyard, that's, probably within a few, million light years of where we are, what we've discovered so far in these potential Earth-like planets, you can only begin to imagine universally how many must be out there, and the potential for life on one of these planets in these zones is just, I mean, it's too high to negate. So it's like, I think this is another example of yet another exoplanet that we're discovering that fulfills some of the criteria of life, liquid water in some form or fashion. But for every one of these we discover, there's probably 1,000 others that we haven't discovered yet. And as our technology improves, we're just going to find more.
Yeah. And
that's exciting. I mean, that's really, really exciting. And then, of course, the next step is not just life, but potentially advanced life, where we may even find intelligent life, or at least remnants or signs of intelligent life that may have existed, thousands or millions of years ago. But conclusive evidence, all we need to do is find someone's shoe, you know, on an exoplanet, and the argument is settled, right?
Yep. Somebody's soda can somewhere.
Yeah, so one soda can, a box top.
Okay.
You know, speaking of telescopes, I was just talking to Anessa, I think it was yesterday, that Hubble, which is a much beloved telescope that is kind of, they're using it until it dies, essentially. Right. And they rebooted it to get a gyroscope to work, which is like the classic IT, you know, solution. If you're having a problem, did you turn it off, turn it on again? And
yeah.
My God, that's what NASA did.
I did pictures like at JPL, right? Some dude, he's like, well, hey, Frank, just unplug it from the wall, plug it back in. Okay.
And then they're like, oh, holy crap, it actually worked. All right.
We're back online.
Oh, man. Yeah. Technology's awesome.
It is. Yeah.
It's a double-edged sword, that's for sure.
Right.
What you got?
I got nonsense is what I got. Since it's been so long, I felt like I should probably go back to the days of when I used to pull stories that contained Scott C. Waring.
Yes.
I wonder what that guy does for a living, because I think he has a lot of time on his hands. So, alien proof, huge ET base discovered using Google Sky. The article that I found was on express.co.uk, and it talks about this large blue object that shows up on a Google Sky map. And they even include the coordinates if you're so inclined. It's the RA is 3 hours, 57 minutes, and 8.63 seconds. And the declinations -7 degrees, 11 minutes of arc and 26.2 seconds of arc. So lat and longitude of the sky, or I guess longitude and latitude of the sky, since RA is more of the longitude. But anyway, so yeah, Scott C. Waring has found another piece of evidence that aliens exist. And he says that whenever you search using the star map, some strange objects will be found. This giant blue alien base is visible on Google Sky Map, and its dimensions and size indicate that it's bigger than Earth, and its geometric pattern is not possible for that size in nature. This is an artificially created object of immense size. This is 100% proof that aliens not only exist in the universe, but are so advanced that the size of their ships are more enormous than anyone ever thought possible. Unquote. That's his big quote. Mm-hmm. And of course, as I mentioned, it's not the first time that he's found some proof of alien life. He found another base back in 2018. And yeah, it's a blue dot. And to me, it looks like an artifact. Just from the image, it doesn't scream starbase to me.
Sure.
Or maybe I'm thinking more of like Death Star, more perfectly spherical, but I suppose it could be like a big glob, because I imagine it would be pretty difficult to build a sphere out in space. Maybe? I don't know.
I don't know. I remember like, what was it? The one star that they discovered that seemed to be getting obscured by something, and they thought maybe there was a Dyson sphere that was around this sun, and they kind of figured out now that it's a planet may have possibly started to break up around the sun, and that's why it's got all this material that obscures it from time to time. But yeah, I'm always a little leery of Scott C. Waring saying that
I found a thing.
He found a thing. That's usually.
Well, I think also that again, I hesitate to poo-poo anybody's idea right off the bat, because You know, I like to try to stay open-minded as possible.
Sure. Yeah.
But I also know that the human brain is sort of wired to recognize patterns.
Yeah.
And certainly patterns, facial patterns. We're sort of programmed to see faces, things that we recognize in inanimate objects. We kind of what's the word?
Anthropomorphize.
Yep.
Yes. When we can look at a screen full of static, and we'll see a face in it, right?
Yes.
Or a rock formation, we'll see a face in it, which is I can understand why our brains are sort of wired that way out of survival.
Sure.
Right.
And so we kind of have to look at things through that filter when people are seeing faces in, you know, iconography or artifacts in alien landscapes.
Yep.
There's one thing to see sort of an ambiguous skull-like formation in a rock face, a faraway mountainscape on Mars, and there's another of seeing, you know, a landing pad from a foreign spaceship, right?
Right.
So, and for me, there, you know, with doing my film Skyman, I try to tap into a lot of this propensity for us as a species to want to believe, to want to see things that may or may not be there, because we do, I think, have a need to find something other than ourselves out there, something bigger, more intelligent, maybe larger than our own kind of isolated island universe on Earth. So I respect that we have this desire to see things, and I don't discount that there may be something there, but at the same time, I have to exercise the scientific methodology too.
Yeah.
Right? At the end of the day, it has to pass the stress test for it to be legit. Only then it will be real, right? If it stands up to peer-reviewed scrutiny, then we're on our way to something real, you know. And but it is still intriguing to me to see these sorts of reports and to see the sorts of kind of you know, evidence out there. We were at the Roswell UFO Festival this past season, and you know, we met a gentleman there that is an expert in artifacts on the Martian surface, you know, and totally swears that there are artifacts on Mars that had inspired, you know, Grecian and Roman architecture, right? Okay. And you can see some of the connections there. Like, oh, okay, I can see where you'd see that in a rock, or where that archway that looks like it's part of that rock formation influencing Roman architecture and all that. So, you know, there's 90% of it's probably you're seeing something that's not there, but then there's that 10% like, oh, you know, you know, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt up to that point. So, but for me, I'm not only fascinated by the potential and the possibility of intelligent life out there leaving behind artifacts, but I'm also fascinated by the human condition that needs to see it, that needs to find this stuff, and needs to make something of all the noise out there. And you know, like this latest, my little news report here to contribute to the discussion, the mysterious radio signals from deep space that we've seen recently. We've had 2 or 3 bursts of these radio signals.
Yep. And
you know, to me, if I was a foreign, I guess that's a relative term, right? If if I was an intelligent life form, you could not help but have radio. But when we are, ever since our initial kind of broadcast of back in the early 40s of broadcasting out into space, if I had a high energy broadcast, that's going to be your signature trail, right? And what we're seeing here, these radio signals being broadcast from many 1.5 billion light years away, and we haven't been able to figure out what they are yet, which I think is fascinating to me. And that may be a remnant of some past intelligent life somewhere,
Sure.
And it's not going to come in the form, I would guess, at least for me, in the form of a space car diagram or something. It's going to be some mathematical. Remember the movie Contact, right? It's going to be
Contact was brilliant.
It's I mean, I don't know if you read the book or not. The book is even better in my opinion, but it's some sequence of prime numbers. It's letting you know that here's a universal language. Math is the universal language, and here we're sending it out to the universe for anyone to pick up. And that to me makes the most sense if you are trying to communicate to the rest of the universe that you're not the only ones out there.
No, agreed. And just the amount of power it must have taken to generate something like that too is...
Well, it's a physics question, right? It's like if you don't have the power to generate it, then you need the power to receive it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a combination of how sensitive are your instruments on the receiving end and how powerful are your instruments on the transmitting end.
And
how can you pick out the transmission from all the noise?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we bring up Hubble, right? And he was one of the ones responsible for the background radiation, right? Where we're sort of, defined the Earth or defined the Big Bang. And that background radiation was sort of discovered by accident, but it was because our instruments became more sensitive. And so as we progress in technology on our own planet, we're able to reach deeper into space. We're able to listen better. We're able, these exoplanets are a perfect example. Like 50 years ago, we were only speculating that there might be other Earth-like planets out there. It was just a random speculation. Now we're actually locating them. And these are the ones that we can only see, right? We can only really see exoplanets by either their gravitational pull on nearby stars or how they cancel out the light from a star as they pass through a star's light. And that's a very small, narrow field of what we're able to see, right? So we can kind of then extrapolate from that. Wow, there's probably 80% more that we're not able to see or detect right now anyway. So that's very exciting to me. That to me fuels the imagination that we may have lots of intelligent life in our own backyard, meaning that our own galaxy, that we're just not able to see yet because we don't have the technology.
No, exactly. We're still kind of infants technologically. I mean, to achieve that level of even flight, to be able to traverse long distances and not have to worry about different forms of radiation that would harm you or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just so much that we don't know yet, and it's kind of interesting and that's why I think you, Anessa, and I really like to read stories like that, because it's just, we're learning something all the time, and that's really fascinating.
Right, and some of them, they do, I don't know. they do leave me wondering, because it's like, I don't know one way or the other if it's an actual object or what have you. And then there's some where I just see it and I'm like, that's an artifact. And I used to work for an astronomy program at a university, and on occasion we would get images or rocks from people that, thought that maybe they were from space or it's a UFO. But I think there were a couple of times where we actually had like a legit meteorite, which was kind of cool. But for the most part, like the photos and stuff that folks would send in, they were all easily explained. Because I do as kind of a hobby. I don't even consider myself anywhere near professional, but just having studied some photography and taking pictures and stuff for fun, some of them were very clearly like lens flare and whatnot.
Right.
But I always hope whenever I get a picture, like, oh, maybe this is something that I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And I had one gentleman call in one time and he's like, okay, so I keep seeing this object to the west and it's around sunset and it's like moving around and it's never in the same spot and I don't know what it is. And I've seen it for the past couple of nights. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's Venus. And he's like, no, it's not Venus. But that's the only thing that I could without seeing it.
Yeah. No.
Logically, that's the only thing that I could say that it was. And I even checked with like a couple of other people, like my boss and coworkers who had been in the field of astronomy for like 30 plus years, each one. And yeah, I felt bad because the guy was very persistent, but I'm like,
yeah.
When Venus or any bright object gets slow on the horizon because of the instability in the atmosphere, it looks like it's dancing around.
Sure. Well, that and autokinesis too.
Right. Things also look bigger than they are when they get closer to the horizon. Because I mean, the moon looks massive when it's coming up or when it's setting, but when it's in the sky, it doesn't look as big.
Yeah. And that's why you always have to, like Dan was saying before, you have to have something kind of concrete enough, not just visual. Not just a visual of it, like a first person account. You need to have other data to kind of put it all together and give it context and, get the full picture of the thing.
Right.
And that's why, witness accounts only will take you so far. It's when you can get other things to, get to kind of back up not so much back up the tail, not that they're lying, but, just to get as much data together to fully understand what was experienced. So
right. And going back to Dan's story about the gentleman in Roswell about the architecture, I can totally see that because, you had astronomers back in the 1800s looking at Mars and thinking that they were seeing channels.
Yep.
And so you had, I don't remember his name, Giovanni Schiaparelli. And then who initially was like, oh, I forget, it's like Canales de Mars or something. And then again, you had another astronomer here in the States, that Percival Lowell, who they named the observatory after, who made that idea more popular. And so you had that come up in stories, but, come to find out that it's not really channels. It's just evidence of water that was once on
erosion,
Mars.
Yeah.
That eroded away and then the water evaporated and you got
And there you
caps
go.
and yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, that's what fascinates me. There is a two sides of the brain, at least speaking for myself, that is very much a science-based examination of reality for me.
Mhm.
Scientific methodology, it has to pass the scrutiny, peer-reviewed research. It matters that things hold up under criticism.
Sure.
Otherwise, it's just faith.
Right.
Yeah. No, exactly.
But at the same time, there's the other part of our brain that really wants it to be true, right?
Yep. Yep.
We're all scientists. And I've got some really dear friends. I've got a dear friend that's an astrologer, or not astrologer, astronomer. Sorry.
No worries.
That that we're all ultimately dreamers, right?
Mhm.
We're you know, you look at almost any science program from Cosmos, from Carl Sagan on up, and they're dreamers at the end of the day. They're dreaming of the potential of humankind, the potential of intelligence, the potential of the cosmos. So we have this romanticized notion of what this potential could be. And it's easy for us to fall victim to this romanticized notion, to want to see things that aren't there. So we have to sort of like check ourselves and make sure that what we are seeing is real, is verifiable, and holds up under scrutiny, which is what I love about science, is that it is, by its very definition, open to criticism.
Mhm.
And but because of that, it explores areas of the mind, explores areas of our realities that we otherwise wouldn't explore if we were just rooted in faith only, right?
Yeah.
And so if I were to look at the universe from a purely mathematical, statistical standpoint and say, what are the possibilities that intelligent life exists in the universe? I'd say it's a pretty high possibility.
Yeah.
Now it may not be anywhere near our neighborhood, but if I were just to kind of do the numbers of galaxies, the billions of galaxies out there, just what we've discovered in exoplanets in the Goldilocks zone in our own backyard, I mean, you'd have to be a moron to not think that there's some level of life out there on some galaxy somewhere in the universe that we may never know exists. We may never be able, we are physically not alive long enough for light to travel to get to us to find out, unless there's some, some form of travel faster than light that we haven't discovered yet. But the sheer possibility is there for me, right? And that's what sparks my imagination. And as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, I love marrying these two sides of our brain. I love, rooting the romanticized notion of wanting something to be bigger than ourselves out there, rooted in the mathematical, scientific side to make it sort of, make it sort of work. And I think that's what I love about Close Encounters so much, is they sort of did that brilliantly, where they made the math work for the romantic, and that's, I think that's awesome.
No, I can't remember who I was talking to about this, and then we'll get back to the show. But scientists and science fiction, in a lot of cases, people have come up with ideas of, since Jules Verne forward, have come up with ideas for, for a technology. And then I think that in a lot of cases, as these young scientists might, read these things or see these things, they're like, what if, is there a way? And I think that marries.
Look at Isaac Asimov as a perfect example.
Sure.
With robotics, psychohistory, and the Foundation series.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how prescient was his work back in the day. And again, like you said, it's science fiction is marrying science and our sort of romanticized notion of storytelling that that part of our brain that need or desire to find meaning in what we see and what we look at is always been fascinating to me. That's why I've been such a fan of science fiction. But I don't think that'll ever stop with us. And I'm curious if other intelligent life forms have the same desire. You know, we assume that we are not unlike other intelligent life forms, but we're completely, you know, sort of contained evolutionary tract, right?
Yeah.
We can only see life through our own prism of experience and our own evolutionary tract. And you know, it's difficult for us to conceive how some other so-called intelligent life form would perceive the universe or care, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting to contemplate. I always like thinking about it, and then I go full circle and have a glass of wine and.
Because sometimes you just need to take a break from that. Too.
Yeah, I'm watching an episode of Community and I'm done.
Well, speaking of observations here, we're going to jump into the sightings, and that's where we pick a particular report, usually from MUFON. I'm sorry, MUFON.
MUFON.
Yeah, I always do the Mulder MUFON.
Yeah, in the X-Files, he says MUFON, and you get a chuckle out of it each time.
But what it is it's a kind of a recording of an eyewitness report that's been sent to MUFON. So here we go. A Kansas witness at Heston reported watching a silent triangle-shaped object just above 500 feet with 3 white lights at its points and 1 red light centered on its bottom, according to testimony from MUFON. The witness was sitting in his company parking lot watching cloud lightning as a storm passed by at 5:35 a.m. July 29th of 2018. I was going to say this year. I'm like, no, not anymore. Still in that grace period of writing 2018.
Right, yeah.
Every day.
About 2 months.
Always an adjustment.
Yeah.
They continue to say they noticed lights coming into view out of the driver window above the car. They spent a few minutes trying to make out what it was, traveling roughly at 5 knots, which means this person has either aeronautical or nautical experience. A couple flashes of cloud lightning in the distance showed the shape of the triangle with no facets or edge differences of any of the 3 sides, 3 straight lines only. Continued to follow the storm until view was obstructed by the parking lot lights. It moved slow and in a perfectly straight line. They had no assumption of what it was, though possibly a Life Watch helicopter, until the rest of the lights came into view. There was no sound that they heard. Now, the MUFON case director in Kansas closed the case as an unknown aerial vehicle. The rest of the report goes on to say a dark triangular object that reflected light appeared solid and had an outline. The surface was dark and had no structural features. Actual size is indeterminate. The object had white lights and 1 red light in the front center with dark surfaces. The exterior lights were unwavering. The elevation of the object was above 500 feet. The object was at least 501 feet away to 1 mile from the witness. So there we go. And this was Heston is a city in Harvey County, Kansas, population 3,709. Salute for Hee Haw fans. All right. So there we go. That's our sighting for this particular episode. I
really like that they actually had a chance to review this one, because we don't always
Yeah.
get that, where someone has had a chance to look into it and has come up with some sort of conclusion.
Kind of follow up.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I really like that this one had that.
Which is why I'm sure it was chosen.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dan, we've been talking for a while now, and we figure we're going to talk directly about your project, Skyman. And before we start, I really want to say that the Blair Witch Project scared the ever-loving crap out of me when I watched it. And it really, and I get the sense while we've been talking here that it is somewhat about perceptions of reality to a certain point, what you witness versus what has actually happened, and everything about that just fascinated me and just, like I said, scared the crap out of me. And now you've got this project, Skyman. And as I was looking through everything, I had a few questions and I wanted to ask you a few things. Is there, because you're calling Skyman is a docudrama,
right?
And it feels, it reminds me not entirely of found footage, but it approaches it from kind of a news or an interview or reporting on a real event that has happened. And I kind of wondered, what is it about that narrative style that really draws you seemingly towards that for a project?
I mean, that's a really good question. It's interesting because when Ed Sanchez, who was my co-writer director on Blair, when we were sort of coming up with the idea for Blair Witch, we were sort of kind of, I guess, a product of the emerging technology of video, reality TV that was just coming out at the time. Certainly 24/7 news was coming out around that time.
Sure.
And, when you see something on a documentary, when you see something reported in the news or war coverage or something like that, it operates in a different part of the brain. Like someone getting shot, on a, I don't know if you guys remember, but like that famous Vietnam footage where that, I think it was a Viet Cong prisoner getting shot in the head.
Yes, I actually was doing something and I actually ran across that picture just recently.
Yeah, when you see the full video of that or something along those lines, it is remarkably impactful emotionally, yet visually sort of anticlimactic. And that's what a documentary is. Like most of what you see that affects you emotionally is sort of anticlimactic from a visual standpoint, because your brain is telling you what you're seeing is real. A gunshot to the head isn't the Hollywood version of blood splattering all over the wall and people flipping and, so on and so forth. It's kind of underwhelming, but that underwhelming part is sort of what works on your brain. And so that's the long version of saying that we wanted to have a movie that sort of played in that space in your consciousness, that was real, felt real, and did not feel contrived. Thinking that the scares would be more amplified in the imagination of the viewer as a result, right?
Yeah.
So Skyman sort of takes a little bit of a kind of a page from that thinking, that although it's not a straight up horror film like Blair Witch was, it's still playing in that same space where, although it's not necessarily trying to be a real so-called documentary, it's playing in that same aesthetic and that conceit of it feels real. There's something about it that feels authentic, that feels real, that the characters you're watching are genuine, and the scenes and the emotions that are coming through operate on the viewer's brain in a different way than a slick Hollywood movie. And that fascinates me. That there's something about that that draws me in as a filmmaker, that one gives me a lot of creative flexibility because I'm not sort of burdened by having to light every scene perfectly or have these flowing dolly moves or, you know, have all this sort of contrived, premeditated Hollywood sort of effects. I can just let the moment and the actors be super pure and super genuine. And I love that purity. I really am attracted to that. And this is sort of ironic because I came from the school of lighting and camera and photography and you know, the Hollywood school of how to make movies. But this improvisational kind of method approach to filmmaking I find very liberating as a filmmaker. And I think Skyman is sort of like me going back to my roots on Blair and playing in that sandbox again where things are more improvisational, things are more spontaneous, and you're sort of more in the kind of the pure realm of keeping it simple but allowing the audience their imagination to sort of take hold, like we did with Blair.
Sure.
And hopefully that's where it'll go. You know, once the end analysis is done and we show the movie, that people will appreciate it for that. But that was my has been and currently my attempt with Skyman.
In looking at the Skyman IndieGoGo page to look at some of the clips that you provided there, I really felt that earnestness, especially with the gentleman who was sort of a friend of the main character of Carl, and he's pointing to the mountain behind him.
Right.
When he's discussing it with the interviewer, and there was just something really kind of compelling and honest about his presentation of his remembrance of these events. And I had that moment of, oh, you know, I felt like I was watching an interview. And then I had that moment where I stepped back and I'm like, you know, wow, this person is acting and they're selling this level of earnestness, but it's not a polished, you know what I'm saying? It's not polished. It feels genuine. And I think, you know, just thinking back to Blair Witch, that's what I think also helped pull you in even further, is just that feel of honesty and presentation.
Yeah, it's a little bit of, you know, at the risk of sounding like a really bad, pretentious film school teacher.
Sure.
It's kind of a meta approach to making movies, and you know, it's completely contrived. I mean, I'm not pretending that any of this is real, but what I'm attempting is that the way we show this story, the way we show these characters feels real, and a lot of thought goes into how do we convey a narrative? How do we control a nuanced narrative and have it feel like there's been no control? That it feels like it's spontaneous, that it feels like it's that we're along for the ride. And that's the tricky part. And that's something I felt like Blair Witch didn't get enough credit for, especially with the actors, that a lot of people just felt like they just went out with a camera in their hand and they just shot what the hell they felt. And a lot of people don't realize that so many months went into the preparation of making that.
And
it's no different with Skyman. We're going into a lot of theory, a lot of meta analysis about. I mean, here's a perfect example. Like, I'm shooting a scene with my main actor on Skyman in a hotel room or out at the Roswell UFO Film Festival, and we're having to sit there and decide on each shot whether or not our actor would have a lavalier microphone on. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
We're having to say, okay, would me as the filmmaker have you labbed up right now? Because having you labbed up implies this is a premeditated moment, right?
Yeah.
So that's one example where we're having to think through every action we do, every shot that's done, to be completely real and authentic, from just simply an audio standpoint, right? So, and as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, I find that fascinating, but again, liberating. It kind of breaks the chains of normal Hollywood style filmmaking, which I love. I have nothing against it. I'm not breaking these chains because I hate the chains. I love a big blockbuster movie as much as anybody, but for this kind of movie, for this level of budget, I think this style is really appealing to me. And so I forgot what my point was, but it's, it is the end goal is for the audience to ultimately identify with the characters, to buy into the story, and to ultimately be emotionally involved. And that's the goal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you, what is it about, and I think we might have covered it a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of solidify this. What do you find really compelling about UFO enthusiasts?
Well, I was, and am, but I was one for many years. I mean, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, UFOs, Bigfoot, Devil's Triangle, the paranormal, that was all the zeitgeist when I was growing up. I mean, I had subscriptions to UFO magazine.
Oh, sure.
And when Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out, that was like a religious experience for me. It was like, wow. I mean, I had a UFO club when I was 13, which was like me and 3 of my buddies in the neighborhood that operated out of my bedroom. But and we would go on these sort of like investigative missions in the neighborhood for UFO sightings and whatnot. So I've always been a lover of science, a lover of the cosmos, and UFOs always obviously dial into that. So as I got older and became more educated, more knowledgeable, more mature, I realized a lot of the stuff that I was sort of buying into was, kind of crazy BS. But at the same time, there is an entire kind of percentage of our population that really continues to believe in this, that buys into this sort of fantasy. And I hesitate to use the term fantasy. This need to have something that's grander than themselves. One of the scariest things, without getting too philosophical here, but one of the scariest things I think about human nature is that we feel like we're out of control. Yeah. That we can't control our environment. So we will default to religion, or we'll default to a lot of different things. And I think intelligent beings outside ourselves that are smarter than us is another version of that, where, there's someone out there that's sort of smarter than we are, that can kind of keep things in check and we're not alone. So that is a kind of, I think, psychological need in most humans that I've met. And that fascinates me. I find that really an interesting kind of part of our psyche to explore. And Skyman attempts in its kind of meager way to house all that within a single character, a character that we all identify with, that at first you feel is kind of a dumb redneck, but you start to realize, oh, this guy's sort of like an Asperger kind of genius dude that we can't be too quick to judge. And that over time you realize, well, maybe this dude's onto something, right? And that he's dialed in his own weird savant-y way into something that might be legit. And over time, as you follow him through his sort of rural American, backdrop, you start rooting for him, and you start rooting for his mission. You start wanting him to succeed. And I'm hoping that Carl is a little piece of all of us, a little piece of romanticized like drive that we all have, that maybe there is something bigger than ourselves, that we are chosen, and one day we'll find it. We'll find our true purpose. And that's always fascinated me. Even when I was a kid, I've always thought that what if there is something or somebody out there that knows a lot more than we do, and it's just interesting to speculate. So it's been sort of a common theme in a lot of projects, a lot of films that I've done. I did a movie called The Objective years ago that sort of plays into these same kinds of themes. I think Blair Witch plays into those themes. So I don't know, maybe I'm just fixated on it. It's fun to play around with, though.
Right. So going back to Carl again, you mentioned that he was an Aspie, like he has Asperger's and a bit of a savant. Was there a reason that you decided to take this direction with Carl, to have him be like on the spectrum?
Well, Carl was inspired by this. I like when characters sort of break convention. I mean, we all have a propensity. I shouldn't say we all do. Many of us have a propensity to sort of like judge a book by its cover. And there's a good friend of mine that worked as a set dresser in Florida that told me this story about they would be driven out to set on the east coast of Florida every morning, first thing in the morning, by a Teamster driver. And the Teamster guy was this kind of typical, muscle-bound redneck guy that drove them out to set for 2 hours, on the highway, and they would park in the parking lot. Once they got to set, they'd park in the parking lot, and they would have to wait for about 20 or 30 minutes before their call times. And so every morning, this kind of Teamster, kind of burly guy would whip out a New York Times crossword and blow through it in like 15 minutes every morning. And that always stuck with me. That story always stuck with me. It's like, oh my gosh, this guy you'd think is some burly redneck is blasting through the New York Times crossword puzzle in like 15 minutes. And so I took that as a little bit of a kernel of inspiration and made Carl out to be someone at face value who think is like, oh, this guy's kind of dim, or he's sort of childlike. But then over time you realize, oh, well, actually, there's something much deeper here. There's something that maybe if you were insightful, you would catch. And part of me understands if there is an alien out there, they could see, they would choose him. There's something about him that the aliens would dial into. So, you know, our actor Michael Selly played that role really nuanced and really well, and so I wanted somebody that kind of walked that line between at 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 first you think he's sort of a simple guy, but then over time you realize there's much more underneath. There's more layers underneath. And I love when characters do that.
Sure. That almost seems to kind of play into your, from what you've described, giving people sort of the components to develop their own conclusions and kind of develop their own reality or their own lens for the particular film that they're seeing.
Yeah.
And then you slowly kind of working them out of that box.
Yeah, I mean, and it's risky. It's a risky way to go as a filmmaker, because you know, there is certainly the version where you really map it out, you play it paint by numbers, and here's what everyone's supposed to think on every scene and every moment in the whole movie. And then there's the version where you're sort of like, you know, here it is. Here's the recipe, and here's a lot of things that are that might be somewhat ambiguous, but I'm allowing the audience to sort of like project in a way through these scenes. And the ending, much like Blair Witch, is going to be somewhat ambiguous. And my hope is that it spurs a lot of discussion in the, you know, out in the lobby of the theater of what happened or what didn't happen. But I may fail miserably at it, but I got to make the attempt. I got to make the attempt to challenge people, to make them think, to sort of like challenge their conventions. And, you know, to me, people are complicated. You know, our experiences are complex, and there is no simplistic answer to anything. So why not make movies that reflect that?
Yeah.
And give the audience the benefit of the doubt that they can kind of like challenge themselves and think through stuff and come up with their own conclusions. So we'll see if it works or not. But I love playing around in that sandbox.
Yeah. Oftentimes I think that we we put a simple label on something so that we can quickly, you know, classify it and, you know, is it a threat? Is it not? Or, you know, try to figure out the reality of the thing. So we just put a label on it quick. And then over time, if you get more and more exposure to the person or the thing, you start to learn more about it. And it's not just that label that you quickly stuck on it just to quickly, you know, put it somewhere in your head. You find out that there's more to it. And I think that that's one thing that you guys, I think, really accomplished with Blair Witch, in that ambiguity, giving people the components to make up their own possible conclusion as to what occurred.
Yeah, and we're getting back to what inspired me as a kid. That's what, if you were to sort of encapsulate the thought, that thought you just described in a photograph, that's why those grainy, fuzzy photographs of UFOs in those old magazines were so effective, right? Because they had that level of ambiguity. It's like, is it a hubcap? Or is it really a flying saucer?
Yeah.
Right? And you could sit there and debate it forever, right? Was it a hoax or not? You know, and that lack of definition, that ability for the imagination to sort of take over and fill in the gaps, has always fascinated me. And Blair Witch was no different. That sort of plays in that same space. Skyman sort of plays in that same space. And I think we will forever, as you know, as a thinking animal, will always be trying to fill in those gaps. So, and I love it when films do that. I love when films give you just enough to get your brain going and get you thinking about stuff and contemplating. You know, and again, I'm not averse to a good old-fashioned Godzilla movie, right? That just lays it all out for you and tells you what you're supposed to be thinking. But at the same time, I like dipping my feet into these kinds of films that sort of challenge you and allow your imagination to sort of like fill in these gaps, and that's fun. That's fun too.
Yeah, I gotta say too, excuse me, that the ending for like The Thing, it's perfect because you got Kurt Russell, you got David Keith, just sitting there looking at each other like, okay, it's one of us, and then we pull out, and,
right,
and we'll never know
yeah,
who it was, and that's always, and I think that's what helps make a movie timeless in a certain sense, or has that impact, because it now leaves you, the person who has experienced this, to draw your own conclusions and come up with perhaps your own ending. And maybe reanalyze it, come back and watch it again to see if you can find clues that would help make your case that the ending that you have in your head is the legitimate ending.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think films. I think films that treat the audience as a collaborator are much more timeless than those that don't.
Sure.
And that's what I hope to do as a filmmaker, is treating the audience as a collaborator in the experience, in the process. My favorite films, I feel like that's what's being done to me. And it's, you can't help but appreciate that. You can't help but want to go back and revisit.
Yeah.
And rediscover and go, well, what did he mean by this scene? Let me go back and look at it again. You know, oh, there's a different meaning. You know, there's a different question being asked of me here. And I love when films do that from really, really good filmmakers, or good books or whatever. Any good piece of art does that, you know. So I can only hope to aspire to that.
I do have one last question before we wrap up the interview portion here. Would you say that Carl's journey is like one of trying to make sense of what happened to him, or is it something else? Or can you not tell us that, because that's really kind of the whole point of the film?
No, I think that's a valid analysis, is that he's trying to make sense of what happened to him, because he's now getting ready to turn 40 years old, right? And he's referencing a time of his life back when he was 10, something that was profound that happened to him. You know, not necessarily traumatic, but it was a huge moment in his life. And now it's sort of re-emerging in his brain. So he's trying to make sense of what it means. What was the meaning of the original visitation? Why him? And why does he feel compelled that there's going to be a reunion? What are the answers to these questions? So he's definitely on a search, you know, sort of on a mission in a way to try to find answers as to why this is happening. So it's definitely, it would be for me, you know, what's the meaning of all this? Why me? You know, how much of this is legitimate and real? And we try to portray it in a way that Carl is having to sift through a lot of chaff, you know, because there's a lot of, you know, as we all know, there's a lot of commercialization with the UFO subculture. There's a lot of BS. There's a lot of people trying to portray themselves as legit and not. So he's sifting through a lot of these waters. He's trying to navigate a lot of this himself. So there's that going on as well. But ultimately, he's looking for answers, and in a way, trying to decipher if this is real, why him? What is it about his experience that he's reconnecting with now that he's turning 40 that is so important? And how could you not want to go back out to that place in the desert to find out?
Yeah, absolutely.
So me as a filmmaker following this guy on his journey, I gotta go. I gotta follow this guy. And it may be a complete bust. It may be ultimately we see this individual come to the realization that his life was meaningless and that it was all for naught, and that that his goals and his hopes and his dreams are dashed against the rocks of the Apple Valley high desert, or not, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on with Skyman, at least in my head as a filmmaker. I hope it gets conveyed on the screen, but that is the goal: is for it to fulfill a lot of those questions.
No, it sounds great, and I'm really looking forward, especially after talking with you, Dan. I'm really looking forward to this film.
Right.
Do you have any possible dates as to when this could?
Well, we're right now we're sort of hoping for the late spring, early summer. I'm in the process of editing right now. We're going to Sundance to show a teaser, sort of an extended teaser for the film that gives a lot of people a little bit of a taste of what's to come, and that will be available both on I think ihorror.com as well as denofgeeks.com. So that's coming up. So but yeah, my goal is to be done with the edit in the late spring, and then it just comes down to economics. Do we sell this to a Netflix or an Amazon, or who picks it up, and when does it get released and whatnot? But we're very optimistic. We think this film is as modest as it is in budget and its initial production approach. I feel it has a pretty big audience in this culture, in this demographic, and not only in the kind of UFO subculture, but I think even broader than that. I think I think ultimately it will tap into what a lot of people feel about their pursuit of what's the purpose of life and what is their role in all of it, and that sort of thing. So hopefully it'll break out into the more mainstream. But I if I were to make a prediction, I would probably say late spring, early summer. We'll have this thing ready to go.
Cool. I'm
Excellent.
really looking forward to it. Like I said, if you guys go to just do a Google search for Skyman and IndieGoGo, and you'll find the page, or you can go to it's Skyman Movie.
SkymanTheMovie.com. Yeah.
SkymanTheMovie.com. Okay. And we're going to make sure that we have all of those links to this on the show notes for this particular episode. So nobody has to worry about that. We'll make sure that you can get to all this stuff so you can see this for yourself, because it's from the clips that I've seen, it's compelling. And it feels, like I said earlier, it feels honest, it feels earnest, and I do feel like I am watching a documentary being made. So, yeah, I really want to see this film. And I'm not saying that because you're here, Dan. I'm saying that because
I really appreciate that. I like hearing that from people that are in this space, and that's whom I'm appealing to. This is something that I don't want I don't want any of you guys to think that I'm pandering or treating the audience lightly. You know, I'm part of this demographic. I've lived and breathed this for many, many years, and whether you buy into the reality or not, I think most everyone will dial into Carl as a character that, oh yeah, a part of Carl is me. I identify with Carl on some level, and that's as honest as I can make it. So
Yeah.
hopefully people will appreciate that.
No, absolutely. I think we're gonna wrap things up.
I think so.
Yeah. So that's it for this particular edition of the Alien Invasion, which is a Galactic Netcast production. I want to thank you so much, Dan, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to talk with us about Skyman and give us some insight into, you know, where you were at and how you came up with the film and how you put it together. Where else can people find out more about you and Skyman one more time?
Well, you can go to skymanthemovie.com, which is the website. You can also go to my production company site, which is gangofrobots.com. And you can go to the Facebook page, which is the Skyman Movie Facebook page, which is, we're now over 100,000 followers. So
Nice.
If you want to sign up and follow our progress through the Facebook page, please do. We are just getting started with this, so it should be a lot of fun. And again, it'll be a cool ride, and everyone involved, you know, should, at least I hope, will find something intriguing and interesting with what we're doing, because it's not only just the movie itself, but it's the way we're shooting it, it's the way we're presenting it, it's the way we're marketing it. It's sort of opening up this broader discussion about you know, intelligent life, what's out there. So all this other stuff surrounding the movie itself, I think is the bonus, is the you know, value added component of the movie, if you will. So that's a lot of fun too.
Sure. Well, I got to say, based on our interview here and our full discussion, it really sounds like a labor of love, and it sounds like you put a lot of thought and effort into it. So I have a feeling it's going to be a success. So
I appreciate that.
I also want to thank Monkey Warhol for providing our intro music that you'll hear in the actual podcast version of this. His song is called Alien Syndrome, and you can find that song and more of Monkey Warhol's stuff at monkeywarhol.bandcamp.com. And also to what?
Redfard von Dernberg.
I knew I was going to stumble over that.
A composer from Germany, for our closing song called Be Water. And learn more about him and his music at thecaravel.net. And also, thanks to Ben Olson for recording our disclaimer audio at the start of this episode. And you can find out more about his stuff at benolson.com. And thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you, one and all. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, guys.
And we'll talk to everyone later.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you, Dan.